Our speaker is somebody who's been around for a long time, a really long time, and a long-time Unity member in our community here and back in San Luis Obispo. So he's been around the track once or twice. Spent a career as a social worker, and so he's going to tell us a little bit about Jesus. So it's Marv Groats. Come on up, Marv.
I enjoyed that. Well, two of the opening songs just fit right in with what I'm going to talk about. So about the belief in healing and so forth. And then the one about John Lennon, kind of a messiah in a way, wanting to change the world to make it better for everybody, right? And then there was Martin Luther King Jr. Another, and on his birthday, I read an article in the newspaper. He was about the Messiah, he was a Messiah. And Jesus, all these people wanting to create the world to be a better place. This is what we all want. So, I'm going to stay on script, so it's going to be a little bit stilted, because otherwise I would go off on a million tangents, because you know me. And I'm verbose. And I'm kind of excited about life, and that's part of what happens here. So, I'm going to flip this over, and I want you to take a look. And who do you see there? What do you see? What's your projection of who that is? You all have your own ideas how that might come out.
The Methodist version of Jesus.
So we're going to talk about. Now you'll notice that it's not white. This is not a white man. Some churches require that. This one is olive color, right? And I love it. I love it. I have sat down with this, and I'll have some incense and or some candles, and I can sit down and I can look at that picture, and I can sit there with my eyes open, take a look, and then close my eyes. I'm still seeing it, and it's inspiring to me. There's a glow in that picture to me. There's an essence that's so beautiful that I find that picture inspiring. Just a picture. But when I come out of that little few moments, I feel better. I just feel better. That's all. And so I'm going to talk a little. I'm going to start off with a little bit of reminiscing about healing, because the first time I spoke to this group was many years ago, and I had prostate cancer. And it starts with page 4. I can turn it over. So I had prostate cancer, and I had this congregation. And I was able to, I lived with it for 10 years, and I worked as best I could to figure out how to beat it. It's not so easy, I found out. But I kept going for a long, long time with my PSAs going up and then back down. And then I got through the years, and finally it started shooting up, and I went and got radiated. I had hoped for a better outcome, but I had 10 years without much problem. And that was quite a few years ago. Myra remembers. She was with me. It's my sweetheart. And so more recently, we had this situation with COVID. And so I went through this period of, it was really nasty for me. Partly because I couldn't go see Myra. She wouldn't come and see me for several months, where neither one of us was going to take the chance of giving it to the other, because it would break our hearts. And even the thought of that makes me tear up. So I'm pleased to be here again. And with the help of science, I came down during COVID. I guess my resistance was down. I came down with prostate cancer again. So here I was dealing with all that nastiness of COVID and then prostate cancer. PSA went shooting up. Fortunately, with more modern science, there was medication, improved medication that helped me get through that. And my PSA went from 12 down to 0.1, now 4 quarters in a row. Now, do I think the medication did the whole job? Maybe, but I think it had a lot to do with changes in my outlook. As we were seeing and what we were hearing this morning, a lot of it's up here, right? And so I am very grateful. I was grateful for all the support I have received from you, from the classes that Chris has set up. And, you know, I've been paying attention. I've been trying to change things, my diet and so forth and so forth. And that PSA went down, okay? I don't think we should underestimate at all the healing power of this congregation. Do you agree? Yeah. Agreed. Okay, now that's the prelude. Now I'll get on with the talk. Okay. And I will kind of, it'll be a little still because I'm going to read it because I'm trying to stay on my 20 or 25 minute time limit, right? Because this guy's going to get on my case if I go over the time. So, and I know that, right? And I don't want that to happen. So today I'd like to say, I'm going to raise a couple of questions. Who is this man really? 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 Who is he? Who was he? He's long gone, of course, but who was he?
Jesus.
He was Jesus. You're right on that, on that part for sure. And we're going to explore a little bit further. So I'd like to ask you to join me in my quest, because I want to find out more about who he is, and I want to find out, and this is where I was coming from when I decided to give this talk. I didn't know where it was going to lead me. Where did these enhancements come from? Some things that seem kind of supernatural and unbelievable. And sometimes if it seems too good to be true, it is. And we're going to explore that. To do so, we need to understand the conflicting stories told by the Apostle Paul and the other 12 apostles, totally removed from Paul. The 12 apostles were led by Jesus' half-brother James. And James was the eldest of 6 half-siblings. And they're related to in the book of Luke. Names the 4 brothers and their 2 sisters. Of course, they're not named. They're women, right? So, I didn't know when I agreed to give this talk just where it would lead me. I had time to do some research. I went to the library and I picked up, I looked for the New Testament. I'll review the Gospels. That's going to tell me a story about Jesus, right? Well, I couldn't find the Bible. So I talked to the librarian. I said, where's the Bible? She says, well, it should be on the shelf. Well, it wasn't on the shelf. And it hadn't been checked out. So it seems some sinner had absconded with the Bible. So I couldn't use that. So then I looked around and I found some other books. And this is the one that I relied on the most. And Harry, my friend Harry's back here, he also loaned me the book Josephus, which Myra tells me was it's a big book. And it tells me that if it wasn't for Josephus, much of Jewish history would have been lost. And there's the book. I've just given it back to Harry now. And and I had several other books. And I'm not following my script quite, but I'm going to get back to it. So I didn't know when I started to give this talk what was going to happen. So I started doing this research, and I found out that a hell of a lot more had been learned since the Gospels. And it has to do with a lot of new manuscripts that were found, and a lot of digging. This man here, James Tabor, now he says he dedicated his life to learning all he could about Jesus and Paul, two critical people in this story. And he was not only an historian, but he was an archaeologist. He was into digs, and he had classes, and he would take them, and then he would go off and do all these digs. And some of you may have seen this kind of stuff on PBS. I have. And it's amazing what they've uncovered, the relics they find, the things that were written, and et cetera, et cetera. So there's an awful lot that was learned from the time of the Gospels. Oh, I already just said that. Among the books were the Jesus Dynasty, Jesus and Paul, the Apostles, and the Dead Sea Scrolls, and plus Josephus. These are available in the San Luis Obispo Library, and if you're interested, what I'm going to talk about today will be a small amount of what I was picking up from these books. I don't have time to get into all of that, but I'm going to stay on these two main things I said I was going to talk about. But there's so much more. If you're curious, go down and pick them up. And you'll be fascinated with all the kinds of information that I had no idea I would come across. Okay, two of the books, Jesus Dynasty and the Jesus and Paul book, were both written by this guy, Tabor. And I want to mention about Unity Church, just a little side note. Now, Unity Church kind of prides itself on not having a lot of dogma, right? We have 7 principles. Now, if you don't acknowledge all 7 of those things as true, you will probably not be excommunicated. Okay? Now, if you happen to have grown up with Christianity, and that's one way, but we have people come here who grew up Jewish. You know? I know they're in the audience. So they didn't grow up with all that. So the formation of let's see here. And by the way, we won't excommunicate them either, right? The formation of the Christian religion, however, was initially founded on a great deal of beliefs and dogma which do not seem to hold up to the standards of reliable facts, common sense, and scientific scrutiny, which is something I think we hold dearly, particularly today, where we find that an awful lot of people are relying on stuff that is not based in science and reasonableness, right? Aren't we experiencing a lot of that today? Yes, that's a real concern of ours. So, and I think Unity holds these principles dearly, that we want something that's reliable and not based on a lot of baloney. And in Christianity, we start off with a religion that was, we start off mostly pretty much with Roman Catholic and Greek Orthodox, and followed by a procession of one after another split off, starting with Martin Luther, right? And Martin Luther, of course, wrote the thesis that kind of changed the way we looked at some of this dogma. And then split offs and split offs and split offs. So now we have how many denominations? I don't know, maybe 40. And each of them trying to get away from the last one's dogma. They create their own new dogma, right? And maybe not quite as rigid as the ones they started out with. But anyway, it goes on and on and on. And then you get down to unity. It says almost no dogma. But we do have our principles. And I think if in the mission statement, if I'm not mistaken, there's some reference to Christianity or Jesus. I think if you look that over, I think you'll find that in there. It's not in our basic principles, but it's in our mission statement. And I'm not reading my script, but I'm not going too far off. According to my research, Jesus did not become a known figure until he was 30 years old. Now, some of you guys know all this stuff, and you knew it before I ever heard about it. Some of you guys that have been studying this stuff for years, maybe. I haven't been. I've kind of been in a vacuum. So some of you, this may not be new information. So Jesus had a ministry that only lasted from age 30 to age 33, and you're going this way. Yeah, you're the scholar, right? So, and from his life to age 30, these were called the lost years. More nods. My gosh, these people are studying. And 3 years was his ministry in a relatively small geographical area, right? I mean, they didn't have taxis running around. They didn't have Uber and, Greyhound. So, people had to travel on foot or maybe on camel. I don't know how they got there. But apparently throngs of people came out. And he became he's been a very charismatic guy. And he had messages that people wanted to hear. So, by the way, I just aside talking about the dogma, the varying denominations. I'm told there are churches, including in this county, who profess white supremacy as a tenet of their faith. Sorry, Jesus. They don't understand. It's not your fault. His preaching was, as I say, limited to a very small area. He had 12 disciples, which you know, who were being trained under the leadership of his half-brother, James, his oldest half-brother, who was also one of his disciples. And so he was the head of the disciple group. And he was designated by Jesus to be so, and acknowledged by the others, including Paul. Although with Paul, it's a little stranger than that. He really didn't quite like the guy, I think. But he knew that he was supposed to be the leader. And he tried to accommodate somewhat. It was made clear to all that James would be the greeter, and in time the disciples took the name apostles. They had lost one of them, that was Judas, because Judas committed suicide after the crucifixion. And he was replaced. But then Paul got into it, and Paul was not really in it with the rest of the disciples. In fact, he didn't meet most of them for another 10 years. He only met James and Peter. Mostly James had contact with him 2 or 3 times over those 10 years. Well, Paul decided to take his ministry outside of Judea, outside of Palestine. He took it to the diaspora. And the diaspora is the area of Asia Minor. That's Greece primarily is where he went, and moving toward Rome. So he created a whole different picture of Jesus than what the 12 disciples do. And they were quite varied. So, I went to Chapman College, which is the denomination of Disciples of Christ. I grew up in that church, went to sang in the choir, and went through the youth groups, and went off to Chapman College, which was associated with the denomination. And there I was required to take a religion class. And there I learned that the books of the New Testament, the Gospels, those 4 Gospels that I thought were probably written by 4 disciples, they weren't. They were written anywhere from 40 to 100 years after Jesus died. So there could be a lot of distortions, and as Kevin Hauber has said in the talk here, there are inconsistencies. Like Mary and Joseph having a visitation, telling them that it's okay. And one of them says that the visitation was to Mary. The other one says it was to Joseph. So they're telling them it's okay for them to get married because this child is blessed. And so it's all right, even though he was conceived out of wedlock. And by the way, this guy says it was probably when Mary was about 15 years old. She got pregnant. And he has a theory that I won't go into of who the father is. You can read these things. You can do that research on your own. But I won't go into it. But it's a very interesting theory. And so here you are, you've got these 2 different groups. So we're going to have to take a real good look at who this guy Paul is. And my first knowledge was when I was at Chapman, and I took a class called Psychology of Religion. Now, I knew where my leanings were going to be because, I could have become a minister or I could go into psychology. I got a C in the religion class, and I got an A in the psychology class. So that pretty well, I figured out pretty quickly that's kind of the direction I wanted to do. I became a social worker. So, but anyway, I still have an interest in religion. And so this was my first experience of Paul, and I took a class called the Psychology of Religion, and that was the most interesting class I ever took in college. And this book was in the book, written by, hope I get the first names right, William James. His brother Henry James is the one that's very well known. Have I got it right? Yeah. So William James, his brother, writes the book, The Varieties of Religious Experience. And in this book, he talks about Paul. So Paul had really been named Saul. And Saul, on the road to Damascus one day, keeled over with a seizure. He had epilepsy, according to William James. And he had what William James called an uprush from the subliminal. which is the unconscious, subconscious. Maybe it's unconscious too. Anyway, he has this uprush. And coming out of that, he converts to being a follower of Jesus. Kind of mystical. So, and then he becomes totally committed and involved spreading the gospel. Okay? He had been a persecutor of the Jesus followers until that conversion. And then he switched over. And it was called an uprush from the subliminal. Suddenly flooded with all things he'd heard about Jesus. As I say, he became committed dogmatically to spreading the gospel to the diaspora. Now remember, that's outside of the Jewish area. That's mostly in Greece. And I saw a map in one of the books, and all these places where all these churches were. And Paul wrote the letters to the Ephesians and the Colossians and on and on and on. So that about a fourth of the New Testament is Paul's writing. And so that encompasses a lot. Plus, he has a major influence on much of the other books. And his perception of Jesus' life and the 12 disciples' perception diametrically opposed. Initially, James was okay with Paul spreading the gospel. Okay, seemed like a reasonable idea. But over time, it became apparent that what was going on here was a little unusual, that Paul kept adding these embellishments. Now, Paul was a gung-ho guy. He was very successful because these units of Christianity, what became Christianity, wasn't yet, were spread all over in the diaspora, particularly in Greece. And, you know, his success was amazing. But how did he sell it? Well, for one thing, if you believe in Jesus as your Savior, hey, how about everlasting life? How about him dying on the cross for your sins? Well, they're taken care of, etc., etc. So he created all these embellishments, and they got into those books of the New Testament. And so on and on that went and compounded, so that we came out with a huge amount of dogma. And where did it go to? Roman Catholic Church, Greek Orthodox Church, Greek. Some of the books were written in Greek. And there's one little book by James. James, the brother of Jesus. And it was a book, really, some instructions to the other disciples and to other people who, you know, it was advice on how to live and so forth too. Some of the Jesus ideas, but not, it doesn't give you a big picture of Jesus, but it's a communication mostly to his disciples. So they decided they were reluctant to put it in the Bible because it wasn't consistent with the real Jesus of Paul, with all these enhancements. Well, they almost didn't put it, but they finally decided to put it in because James was the brother of Jesus. This is four generations after Jesus had died. They were putting the Bible together. Fourth generation AD. By the way, Jesus was born in 5 BC. Seems like they didn't get it quite right in the beginning. So there's lots of discrepancies you find along the way here. So anyway, here's these two different camps of religions forming. And almost no contact between Paul and the 12 disciples, 10 of which he didn't meet until much later. And the two he met, I think maybe Peter once, and James 2 or 3 times over that 10 years. He was off doing his own thing, creating his own world of religion. The disciples are over here. Now, what happened after that? Well, Paul's religion came out dominating. And that's the religion that we grew up with. There's not a whole lot of influence beyond the prevalence of it from Paul. So Paul had found a way of gaining followers with his embellishments. That included redemption from sin, a reordering of the world that would provide relief from the yoke of Rome, and eventual eternal life. Nothing a little bit maybe revolutionary in some of this. Well, other enhancements would include the virgin birth, the stories about the 3 wise men bringing gold and frankincense. All this was to make Jesus look bigger and super. Virgin birth was not an uncommon claim. Some of the Roman leaders had claimed that. It gave them distinction. This was what they call virgin birth. It's there's another word for it. Immaculate conception. Thank you. I was looking for that one. Immaculate conception. I don't know how many people you know that have had that kind of conception, but anyway, I mean, maybe some of us might want it. You know. I was born premature. I don't know if that helps at all. So he found a way of gaining followers. This is part of his success. He was selling them a big pile of goods that they wanted to hear. And do you think there might be something like that going on today? And I'm not going to name names. I don't want to get into a political talk here. But, you know, trying to get people to believe a lot of stuff that has no basis in science, no basis in common sense, and so forth, those principles we think are important. Trying to base a religion in that kind of thing doesn't hold a lot of water, a lot of holy water. Okay? I thought I was going to be reading this to you, and I find out I didn't need to do that. So this is fine. I'm going right through it pretty much. So whatever happened here to the 12 apostles? So they were over in the Jewish area spreading the gospel, and they were spreading it. They were doing a good job. James was the leader, and they were getting a lot of followers. And of course, Paul was getting a lot of followers, creating little churches here all over the place. And the apostles were spreading the gospel, and they got a good number of people following them. Eventually, they shifted into being called the Nazarenes. And I don't think it's probably maybe it has no relationship to the Nazarene church now, I don't know. But anyway, that name comes from the Nazarenes. Well, Jesus was from Nazareth. And so that was, by the way, a very poor community. He was raised poor. He seemed to have a real understanding of the needs of the poor, and he was very open to people of all. You need to wrap it up. So now that we've gotten this far, I'm just about done. So the Nazarenes went off their way, and the other churches went off their way. So the Nazarenes eventually were done in. There was an upheaval. Rome was invaded. After an uprising from the Jews, Rome came in and took down the temple and so forth. So the Nazarenes, their writings and so forth were pretty much lost. And we don't know a lot about Jesus from them. So to tie things up, who is Jesus? That was my question, right? Who was Jesus? And my answer is, I don't know for sure. I have this information, I have that, but the information from the Nazarenes is mostly lost. So, and they were the ones that grew up with Jesus. His oldest brother, of course, was with him through his life. And they're the ones that knew who Jesus was. Paul did not. He created his own vision. And he had visions that came to him, and they were Jesus speaking to him. Jesus was long gone. And he had all these visions. He was a character. And that went on and on. So, what do we know? We don't know. What I don't know. We know a little bit. And that some of the Bible, how much is true, literally, hard to say. So, the other question I asked, what about embellishments? Did we learn something about embellishments? I think we learned something about embellishments. They were Paul's creation to sell Christianity. And to wrap things up, I'm thankful to have this opportunity to speak to you all, and wish you well. And if you have a chance, I encourage you, if you're interested, to go get to the library and get some of those books. It's fascinating. There's a whole lot more information. Namaste.